The courtroom fell silent as the judge uttered the word guilty. But the fingerprints didn't match. The timeline didn't fit. The only thing that did was his skin color. Outside, his mother collapsed, screaming. He wasn't even there. And in that moment, one juror stood up, with a secret that could destroy everything. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. Late winter sunlight slanted through the high windows of room 216 in Hawthorne Hall, painting thin rectangles of light across the rows of desks. The air smelled of chalk dust and stale coffee. Dozens of students shuffled their papers, adjusted notebooks, and glanced anxiously at the large blackboard at the front, where Professor Aldridge's chalk lay poised to begin his lecture. Among them sat Elijah Monroe, 16, with dark skin that often faded into the background in rooms like these. His jacket was too big, his hair slightly unkempt, and his manner unassuming. He sat in the back row, just left of center, where he was least likely to attract attention. Elijah had always chosen that seat. It offered a vantage point on both the board and the professor, but allowed his presence to dissolve into the classroom's ambient crowd. Teachers would sometimes call on students at random, especially those in the front row. Elijah knew that by staying in the back, he could observe, think, and not have to defend his position unless he chose to. Often he went weeks unnoticed, slipping through each lecture like a ghost among hosts. On this particular morning, the tension in the room felt different. Instead of the usual polite rustling, a hush descended when Professor Aldridge strode in, chalk in hand, his eyes scanning the students. He cleared his throat, and without greetings began writing a new equation in sprawling, precise script. Name, text, find all real functions, f, satisfying, f, x, y, ace, f, where a, b, c were non-integer constants, carefully chosen, such that no known closed-form solution existed. He paused, chalk hovering, then looked back at the class. The reward was simple, $1,000 for a correct, novel solution. He made no small talk, no preamble. The room exhaled, as students leaned forward, eyes on the board. From the front rows came low murmurs. Impossible. They're testing us. He must have made it up just now. Some flipped open textbooks, others scrolled phones, searching for reference to the constants. But in the back, Elijah's eyes sharpened. He felt a familiar pulse in his brain, a spark of recognition, as though a latent path opened. For years, Elijah had studied differential equations in borrowed library texts, piecing together methods, probing integrals, differentiating boundary problems, and mapping unusual cases. He had scribbled half-solutions in the margins of his notebooks. But a problem exactly like this, crafted in a way that evaded standard techniques, had never been presented in class, or in his studies. This one seemed custom-made to trap even the brightest. Yet something about its structure whispered to him. The integral constraint, the non-standard features, the hidden eigenfunction transformation. He leaned forward, pen ready. Around him, the class sputtered into chaos. Someone whispered that the constants A, B, C had no meaningful analytic identity. One student even nudged the kid next to him. He's just trying to humiliate us. Others tapped calculators, or stared blankly. No one attempted to write anything down at first. They waited, paralyzed by uncertainty. But Elijah's pen moved. He sketched hypotheses, try Laplace transforms, propose a substitution, fxbe lemma xg gees, or a series expansion, with weight functions. He tested particular cases, tracked boundary behavior, manipulated integrals. He wrote lines full of derivatives, integrals, substitutions, cancellations. In his mind, he traced each step, checking that no divergence emerged, ensuring his transformations held in the non-integer coefficient case. He felt the temperature rise in the room. Though he sat in cold concrete, he could hear his own steady breath. The professor turned, paused, then spun back to the board, erased a chunk, and continued writing auxiliary conditions, boundary values, suggested substitutions, possibilities of asymptotic expansions, and transforms. The board became a tapestry, symbols, Greek letters, arrows, bracketed domains. No one ventured to interrupt him. No one pushed through the silence to ask why this, or what if that. The room was locked into the moment. Elijah's writing intensified. He had to check the consistency of his trial solution. If his choice of llama didn't satisfy the integral constraint, everything would collapse. He rearranged terms, inserted integrals by parts, compared coefficients, and noticed a hidden symmetry for particular mapping of non-integer constants to an eigenvalue spectrum. The solution could reduce to a generalized Bessel-type function with an integral transform. In that moment, his pen scribbled what looked like a new form: f(x) ex alpha 1 dx al beta w x, with a weight function w expressible as a series in orthogonal polynomials. He matched coefficients, cancelled divergences, collapsed the infinite series under certain summability conditions. He imposed the integral constraint, and after long derivation, several pages long, arrived at a condition on alpha, beta, that tied back to a, b, c. It closed. The final line, the functional form, satisfied both the differential equation and the integral condition. He paused midline, checking every constant, every exponent. He realized he had derived a solution that the professor had thought impossible to express exactly. But he also realized others would challenge it. A bead of sweat formed at his hairline. He glanced up at the board. Professor Aldridge was watching him, watching the class, watching the board, perhaps realizing the moment had shifted. A student in the front muttered, "He must be copying someone." Another nudged further, "Who is that kid anyway?" Some in the middle rows stole glances back. For once the charge of invisibility faltered. All eyes were drawn toward Elijah. He felt a tingle in his spine. Exposure without consent. He turned his page gently, as if hiding the details, but his hand trembled. At that moment, the professor set his chalk aside and said, "I'd like someone to come up and show their method, step by step. Who thinks he can?" The room inhaled. A few timid hands hovered, then withdrew. No one stepped forward. Professor Aldridge's gaze landed squarely on Elijah in the back row. The silence stretched until it felt audible. He pointed. "You." The class exhaled all at once, and all heads swung toward him as though he were the only point in the room. Elijah's heart thudded, but his voice did not waver. He rose, slid his chair back, and walked toward the front. The creak of his shoes on old linoleum echoed. The professor gestured to an empty desk beside the board. Elijah set his notebook there, opened it to the derivation, and turned to the class. Time slowed. A few students stiffened. Some reached for their phones to record, to tweet, to capture this anomaly. In that hall of supposed intellects, all eyes now landed on him. He took a breath, placed his pen on the board, and began rewriting his first line, step by step toward that derived solution. No one expected what would happen next. For several seconds after Elijah put down the chalk, the only sound in the room was the faint hum of the overhead lights. The blackboard, once a chaos of symbols, now carried an elegant string of expressions that connected perfectly from left to right. A solution that shouldn't have been possible. The simplicity of his final line unsettled the air. Professor Aldridge stood motionless beside him, the chalk dust still clinging to his fingers. He'd watched hundreds of students attempt equations like this, usually ending in a web of failed derivatives and corrections. But this time, it wasn't failure. It was precision, and that in a way was the problem. The professor's gaze lifted slowly toward Elijah, a boy whose presence he could hardly remember calling attendance for. 16. Quiet. Unfamiliar. The kind of student people forgot to notice. The class, however, had begun to notice him now. Too much. From the second row, a murmur rippled. "He copied that," whispered one student, loud enough for others to hear. Another replied, "Copied from where? It's unsolved." Laughter followed, uneasy and sharp. The professor didn't intervene. He just kept staring at the board, then at the boy standing beside it. Elijah's chest rose and fell slowly, trying to hold still against the weight of 100 eyes. He could feel disbelief gather like static in the air. The solution he'd spent the entire hour deriving, the one he'd built from scratch using logic and intuition, now hung suspended, not between proof and error but between prejudice and acknowledgement. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, but soft. "The coefficients cancel through substitution. That's why it holds under the non-integer constants." No one moved. The professor blinked. "You're saying the constants, the very reason this equation resists a standard solution, somehow cancel under your mapping?" "Yes, sir," Elijah said. "If you treat the integral as a constraint instead of a boundary, the relation simplifies." Several students shifted uncomfortably. The professor's eyebrows rose. "Constraint? Not boundary?" He crossed his arms, tone turning sharp. You're implying you understood the nuance of that phrase better than your professor? Elijah hesitated, unsure whether it was a genuine question or a trap. I only followed the math, he said carefully. The professor's lips tightened. Followed the math. He turned to the class. You all hear that? He gestured toward Elijah, voice growing louder. A visitor from another department followed the math, better than the rest of you. Do we find that likely? Laughter erupted again. Hollow and cruel. It echoed off the walls. The kind of laughter that pretends to be humor but carries the undertone of exclusion. Elijah stood still. His hand, still dusted with chalk, hung by his side. His notebook lay open at the front desk, pages filled with evidence. His handwriting, his steps, his thought process. But evidence wasn't what they wanted. They wanted doubt. Doubt was easier than belief. A girl near the window muttered. He probably saw it online. Another student, smirking, added, doesn't even look like he belongs in this class. The professor didn't stop them. He watched Elijah's reaction instead, like a scientist observing a specimen. The silence that followed was thick with the quiet violence of assumption. Elijah finally said, I didn't copy it. I can show every step if you want. Aldridge's expression flickered, not anger but something colder. Curiosity, wrapped in disbelief. He turned toward the board again, scanning each symbol, each notation. His academic mind recognized the logic, the symmetry. It worked. That was the problem. The university had hosted this challenge for years, framing it as an open problem to inspire graduate research. A freshman solving it would have been shocking, but a 16-year-old black boy from the community outreach program, that was scandalous. It threatened the invisible order everyone pretended didn't exist. Aldridge leaned closer to the board, squinting. Show me, he said quietly. Then louder, show us how you got here. Elijah hesitated. Right now? Yes, now. The words carried the weight of command, not invitation. He turned back toward the board. The chalk felt heavier than before. Behind him, the room filled with the rustle of notebooks closing. No one planned to take notes. They weren't there to learn anymore. They were there to watch him fail. Elijah took a slow breath. The first step, he began, is realizing the constraint isn't restrictive. It's structural. The professor raised an eyebrow. Meaning the function has to exist within the integral, as part of the equation's behavior, not as an external limit. Aldridge smirked faintly. Bold claim. Continue. Elijah's chalk moved again. He retraced his steps, rederiving the sequence. The blackboard once again filled with symbols, his handwriting firm but deliberate. The room grew quiet, the kind of silence that can either crown a prodigy or bury a fraud. As he wrote, something shifted. The same students who'd laughed began exchanging uneasy glances. The logic was too clean, too consistent. Even those who doubted him could see it. Every derivative, every substitution, every simplification matched perfectly. At the midpoint of the equation, the professor interrupted. Wait. He stepped forward, tapped a line near the top. This term, you inverted it incorrectly. Elijah blinked. No, sir. It's inverted because of the non-integer order of differentiation. The negative sign carries through. The professor frowned, retracing it mentally. Realization flickered. Elijah was right. But he said nothing. He only stepped back, arms crossed again, face unreadable. A few students noticed. One whispered, he actually caught that. Another muttered, no way. Elijah continued, line by line, building the structure back to the final result. By the time he reached the last expression, the entire room had fallen into a strange, suspended silence. His chalk squeaked softly as he circled the answer. Then he turned around. That's it. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, a slow, hesitant clap broke the stillness. It came from the back. One student, nervous but impressed. Another joined. Then silence again. Professor Aldridge didn't clap. He stared at Elijah as though trying to solve a different kind of problem. Not mathematical, but existential. What's your name again? Elijah Monroe, he said. The professor repeated it softly. Elijah Monroe. He let the name roll in his mouth like it didn't fit there. And where are you enrolled, Mr. Monroe? I'm part of the university's outreach program. High school division, Elijah said quietly. A few students gasped. One chuckled. You're kidding. Another said under their breath. A high schooler. Seriously? The professor's jaw tightened. You mean to tell me this solution, this entire derivation, came from someone who hasn't even been admitted here. Elijah nodded once. Yes, sir. Aldridge looked back at the board, then at the murmuring class, then back at Elijah. His voice hardened. Then you understand why I find that hard to believe. The murmurs turned into full-blown whispers. He's lying, someone said. Probably memorized it. There's no way he came up with that. Elijah's throat felt dry. He wanted to speak, but each word felt dangerous. Anything he said could be twisted into arrogance or defiance. Finally, the professor raised a hand to quiet the class. Until I verify this, he said, no conclusions will be made. He looked back at Elijah. But I'll be honest, young man. I don't believe this came from you. The statement hung heavy. Heavier than any insult could have been. It wasn't shouted. It was delivered calmly, academically, the way prejudice often wears a scholar's face. Elijah said nothing. He just stared at the board, at the logic he had proven true, and realized truth alone wasn't enough. Outside, the afternoon sun had dipped, casting the room in a dim golden light. Shadows stretched across the desks. The board gleamed faintly, the solution shimmering like fragile evidence of something the room wasn't ready to see. Aldridge stepped closer, lowered his voice. If you're confident this is your work, he said, you'll have no issue proving it, in front of everyone. The words sliced through the quiet. Heads turned, eyes widened. Elijah froze. The professor's next words were even colder. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, you'll rederive it, live, before the entire department. The class gasped, a mix of excitement and cruelty. The whispers began again. Elijah stood still, trying to steady his breath, feeling both exposed and erased in the same heartbeat. And as the laughter echoed softly behind him, he realized this wasn't about math anymore. The professor asked him to prove it, in front of everyone. The hush that followed Professor Aldridge's challenge to rederive the solution echoed in Elijah's ears like a gavel striking silence. Students shifted in their seats. Some exhaled sharply. Others glanced down at their own notebooks as though suddenly embarrassed. Elijah, pinned before the board and before the expectations of dozens, felt the weight of gazes converge on him. He could taste tension, coppery, sharp, filling the room. Professor Aldridge walked away from the board and toward his podium, clearing his throat in that professorial way that demanded attention before speaking. Class, he said carefully, I'm going to verify that what he's done is original. I hope you all will understand the rigor a solution of this magnitude requires. His words were measured, but loaded. Elijah sensed that the professor's tone was already doubting more than he was allowing to surface. A student in the front row, pale and eager, raised a hand. Professor, before he starts rewriting, can we see his notebook? Check for prior drafts, research, or notes. The voice quivered slightly, as though aware of the line being crossed, but it cut across the room. A murmur followed. Others nodded. They were not asking if he had worked it himself. They assumed he must have cheated unless proven otherwise. Elijah's heart stuttered. He swallowed. I can hand it over, he said. His voice came out thin, careful. The class leaned in as though anticipating a trap. Papers rustled. Fingers curled on pens. The professor watched Elijah with a quiet clinical interest. Aldridge nodded. Yes, do that. He gestured toward the notebook on the desk. Let me see everything you have. Drafts, notes, references. Elijah walked to his notebook, knees uneasy. He opened it at the front cover. Blank title page. Then flicked through the initial pages, notes from prior classes, library derivations, partial proofs he had labored over late nights. Margin scribbles in pencil, corrections, erasures. Every line bore his handwriting. He handed the notebook over. The classroom felt suddenly cold, as though the air had been sucked out. One of the students in the middle rows stood and took it. They flipped through hurriedly, head tilted sideways. A whisper rippled. This can't be right. Another voice muttered, there's no watermark, no professor stamp, nothing about a research paper. More laughter, low and bitter. The tension in Elijah's throat churned. Aldridge collected the notebook, turned pages deliberately, nodding once or twice, scanning with narrowed eyes. After a long moment, he looked up. Interesting, he said, voice low. Very interesting. He closed the notebook slowly, placed it on his desk, and regarded the class. But interesting doesn't prove originality. The room held its breath. Elijah stood frozen. Every pulse in his body felt visible. He swore he could hear the tick of a clock behind the walls. Aldridge cleared his throat. Given the magnitude of this result, I'm gonna ask for more. Independent verification. I will compare your work to any published material, databases, archives, everything. If any part is traced or matched, your claim will be invalid. He paused, scanning the faces. I trust all of you are capable of distinguishing ambition from deceit. Students exchanged glances. Some looked sheepish. Some looked triumphant. Elijah felt the sting of betrayal bleed through the room. Then a soft voice broke. Professor, may I ask a question? It was Dr. Caroline Voss, a visiting lecturer from the mathematics department, leaning against the back row wall. She had observed the class for some weeks. Her tone was calm but firm. Are you going to give him access to the university's computational archive? Many proof verification tools exist. If he truly produced this, he should have the chance to confirm it against existing databases with full transparency. Her presence felt like a cool wind sweeping through the tension. Aldridge frowned, his pride flickering. That's not my usual practice in this course, he said tersely. But given the stakes, yes, we will run cross-checks. Departmental resources will be allocated. His words struck Elijah like both a shield and a test. Voss nodded once, satisfied. Another student called out from the back. Why do you even give him the benefit of the doubt? The room tensed. Affronted cheers. One more. Because it's a PR stunt. The class laughed again, crueler than before. Elijah clenched his jaw. His throat tightened. Even as his mind whirled, he felt something new. Resolve. He could not back down. The injustice was plainly visible. If anything, he would make them see it. Aldridge raised a hand. Enough. You will all bear witness during tomorrow's rederivation. Until then, I expect all of you to refrain from commentary, speculation, or posting any of this publicly, including social media. His tone was fine. The class sat in uneasy compliance. The schedule for tomorrow's live rewrite hung like a guillotine. Elijah felt his chest tighten, his mind a storm of algebra, guilt, doubt, and defiance. He looked toward his notebook, now resting on the professor's desk, pages closed, hidden. It would be dissected, challenged, ripped apart. Every implicit bias in that room would magnify the scrutiny. A student near the door whispered, audible to a row, "He's going to break." Another responded, "Maybe that's the point." Their words stung because they were not hidden. They were open, whispered cruelty. Elijah heard them. His heart pounded. As class ended, whispers trailed behind him. Some students edged around him as if he were contagious. Others stared furtively. Phones flicked open. Fingers hovered over keys, ready to tweet or repost. A few faces wore expressions of cautious respect, rare and uncertain. Voss lingered, as others gathered belongings, and left. She approached Elijah quietly. "You should rest tonight," she said, voice gentle. "Stretch your proof in your mind. Tomorrow will be hard. But you're not alone." Her eyes, wise and calm, landed softly on him. "Don't let them reduce logic to rumor." Elijah nodded, drained but steady. He felt gratitude, but also the acute awareness that this was bigger than him. The stakes were no longer just a reward. The implications of race, of respect, of who could claim space, stretched beyond that classroom. As students filed out, Professor Aldridge lingered at the podium, staring at Elijah. His shoulders stiffened. He murmured under his breath, perhaps to himself, "We'll see how genuine his conviction is." He looked toward the door, then back at Elijah's empty desk, and then at the closed notebook still lying under his hand. Elijah walked out, each step heavy. He stepped into the corridor's fluorescent light, where voices drifted, laughter, disbelief, speculation. The walls, plaster and institutional beige, seemed suddenly oppressive. Yet he held his head high. Outside, a hush fell over the hallway. Corners of students paused, glanced at him as he passed. A few looked away quickly. Elijah's pulse felt like a drum in his ears. The notebook, evidence, would be dissected overnight. The challenge was clear: prove it or be erased. But as he reached the stairs, a text message buzzed in his pocket. He glanced down. It was from an unknown number, name showing only X. The message read, "I've seen your proof before." His heart jumped. What did that mean? Someone else had seen this work already? The hallway seemed to tilt slightly. Elijah froze in place, phone trembling in his hand, ears straining for footsteps behind him. Who could that be? Ally or threat? The professor called campus security. The morning came gray and heavy. Clouds pressed low over the campus like the sky itself was watching. Elijah barely slept. Equations and doubts looped in his head all night, every variable tied to the weight of what awaited him. By dawn he was sitting on the edge of his bed, buttoning his cleanest shirt, one his mother had ironed the night before, pressing hope into every crease. He stood before the mirror for a long moment. His reflection looked older than 16. Tired eyes, jaw tight, skin tense from sleeplessness, and fear disguised as resolve. His mind kept circling one thought: I solved it. That should have been enough. But he knew better now. In this world, especially in rooms like the one he was walking back into, truth wasn't enough when it came from someone like him. When he arrived at Hawthorne Hall, students were already gathered. They weren't there for calculus, they were there for a spectacle. The rumor had spread overnight. A high school kid tried to scam the math department with a fake proof. Phones were out. Laughter drifted between whispered gossip. He could feel eyes tracking him as he walked through the hallway toward room 2. Inside, the atmosphere was colder than yesterday. The board had been wiped clean, the blinds half drawn, and in the center stood Professor Aldridge, arms crossed, a clipboard pressed to his chest like a shield of authority. 2 other faculty members sat near the front, departmental witnesses. Elijah recognized one, Dr. O'Brien, head of research integrity. The other was Dr. Voss, the visiting lecturer who had defended him yesterday.
Mr. Monroe, Aldridge said without warmth, gesturing toward the front. Glad you decided to show up.
Elijah nodded politely. You asked me to. The professor's smile was tight. Of course. He pointed to a desk near the board, where a fresh stack of paper sat beside an uncapped pen. You'll work there. No notes, no references, no outside materials. Rederive your solution exactly as you claim you did yesterday. Elijah's pulse quickened. Yes, sir. He took his seat. The whispers began immediately. Watch him crash. He won't even make it to the 3rd step. Probably Googled it. Dr. Voss shot the group a sharp look. This isn't a circus. Let him work. The room quieted, but the air still vibrated with skepticism. Professor Aldridge began. You may start when ready. Elijah took a slow breath, placed the pen down, and began writing. Each line of the derivation came back to him like memory, fluid, methodical, deliberate. He filled the first page, then another. As he worked, the tension in his shoulders eased slightly. The logic flowed. Even under the weight of silence, the math obeyed. He didn't notice the time passing. He didn't hear the low murmurs that occasionally broke the stillness. But he felt something strange, an unease that grew with every line he wrote. When he reached for the 3rd page, Aldridge stepped closer. Stop. Elijah froze. The professor leaned over his desk, scanning the paper. He frowned. Interesting. Identical to yesterday's derivation so far.
That's the idea, Elijah said cautiously.
Aldridge smirked faintly, and yet suspiciously identical. Down to the spacing and margins, almost too perfect. Elijah blinked. Because it's the same solution. The professor straightened. Or a memorized forgery. The class rustled again. Elijah felt heat creeping up his neck. You're accusing me of... I'm simply observing patterns, Aldridge said, voice even. You claim to have derived this independently, yet your notes appear rehearsed. I practiced because you asked me to prove it, Elijah said, his voice sharper now. Dr. Voss interjected. Professor, are you implying he shouldn't have prepared? Aldridge didn't answer her. He turned to the witnesses. We'll proceed. Continue, Mr. Monroe. Elijah forced his focus back onto the paper. Jaw tight, heart pounding. He wrote through the next steps, each formula steady. He could sense Aldridge pacing behind him. Every scratch of pen on paper felt like it was being measured against expectation. By the time Elijah reached the final integration, a full hour had passed. His hand trembled from tension, but the math stood flawless. He looked up. I'm done. Aldridge stepped forward again, picked up the pages, and examined them wordlessly. His eyes narrowed at certain lines, darted over coefficients, then stopped midway through. He turned to the class. Remarkable. His voice was flat. But tell me, Elijah, when exactly did you learn these methods? Which class, which textbook? Elijah hesitated. I taught myself, from old university texts online. The professor's lips curved faintly. Self-taught. At 16. And somehow you arrived at a solution that's eluded professional mathematicians for years. I just saw something they didn't, Elijah said softly. The room stirred again. A few students snickered. The professor let their doubt hang heavy before continuing. Tell me then, Aldridge said, tapping the paper. Why does your integral constraint resemble an unpublished thesis I reviewed last year? The words hit like a slap. Elijah's brow furrowed. What thesis? A research proposal submitted by a doctoral candidate, the professor said coolly. It was rejected, but some of the structural notation here looks familiar. Dr. Voss frowned. That's a serious accusation, Professor. Unless you're suggesting plagiarism, I'd recommend caution. Aldridge ignored her. The resemblance is uncanny. Perhaps, Mr. Monroe, you've come across confidential material somewhere? Online forums, leaked repositories? I've never seen anything like that, Elijah said, voice shaking. I swear. The professor's tone hardened. Swearing isn't proof. Elijah stared at him, disbelief flooding his chest. Neither is prejudice. Gasps rippled through the room. Dr. O'Brien lifted his head sharply. The silence that followed was suffocating. Aldridge's eyes flashed. Excuse me? You don't want to believe I could have done it, Elijah said. Steady now. That's what this is really about. Aldridge's jaw clenched. Watch your tone. Dr. Voss leaned forward, eyes cold. No, Professor. Let him speak. The room seemed to hold its breath. Elijah continued quietly. If this were one of your graduate students, someone who looked the part, you'd be celebrating them right now. But me? I don't fit the picture. I'm not supposed to be the one who solved it. The words cut through the air. Even those who had mocked him fell silent. The truth of it was too sharp to ignore. The professor looked at him for a long, taut moment. Then he said softly, You're not supposed to be here, Mr. Monroe. The words weren't shouted. They were whispered like a verdict. Elijah's stomach twisted. What do you mean? Aldridge turned to the witnesses. Our outreach program allows observation, not competition. The $1,000 reward is open to enrolled students only. Technically, he's ineligible. It felt like the ground had been pulled from under him. Elijah blinked, stunned. You're disqualifying me. Not disqualifying, Aldridge said coolly. Clarifying eligibility. Dr. Voss stood abruptly. That's not what you said yesterday, and you know it. Aldridge avoided her eyes. Rules are rules. The whispers started again, gleeful, ugly. Knew it, someone said. He never belonged here anyway. Elijah stared at the board, at his own proof still glowing faintly in the sunlight cutting through the blinds. It was right there, truth in symbols, but suddenly worthless in the eyes that refused to see him. He gathered his papers, trembling, heart pounding in his ears. You changed the rules because of me. No, the professor said, voice clipped. The rules were always there. You just didn't read them. Dr. Voss stepped forward. Enough. You can't humiliate a child for being brilliant. Aldridge looked at her, tone icy. This is not humiliation, doctor. It's due process. But his next words betrayed him. He should have known his place. The room froze. Even the whisperers fell silent. Elijah's breath caught. That single phrase, simple, venomous, sliced through him deeper than any insult. His place. The words echoed in his chest like an accusation, older than the classroom itself. Dr. Voss turned toward him, fury flashing in her eyes. Elijah. But before she could finish, two uniformed campus security officers appeared in the doorway. Their badges gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Professor Aldridge, one asked, you requested a presence? Elijah's blood ran cold. Aldridge didn't even look at him when he said yes. I'd like this young man escorted to the administration office. We'll verify his enrollment and the authenticity of his claim. The officers stepped forward. One gestured to Elijah. Sir, if you'll come with us. The class watched in stunned silence. Elijah's pen rolled from his hand, hitting the floor with a hollow click that echoed through the room. Dr. Voss shouted, This is outrageous. But Elijah didn't fight. He just stood still, staring at the professor's expression. Calm, self-assured, righteous. The face of power protecting itself. And yet, beneath the humiliation, something in Elijah hardened. He picked up his fallen pen, looked at the officers, and said quietly, I'll go, but I'm not done. Because tucked inside his notebook, the one they thought they'd taken, Elijah had hidden something the professor didn't expect. But Elijah had something the professor didn't expect. The walk to the administration office felt like a slow march through a world that had already decided who Elijah Monroe was. The hallway that yesterday had only been whispering, now buzzed openly. Students paused mid-conversation to stare as the two campus security officers escorted him. Their hands didn't touch him. They didn't need to. The distance between them and him was enough to make it clear who held power. Dr. Voss followed close behind, her voice low and furious. "This is a mistake, and you know it," she hissed to Professor Aldridge, who strode ahead as though conducting a routine procedure. "You've turned an academic exercise into a public spectacle." Aldridge didn't look back. "If he's genuine, the truth will protect him," he said. "If he isn't, exposure will." Voss's jaw tightened. Exposure isn't justice. They reached the glass-walled office of Student Affairs. Inside, a secretary looked up, startled, as the group entered, a black teenager flanked by officers, a stiff-backed professor, and an incensed lecturer. The visual said everything before words did. The dean, a gray-haired man in a tailored suit, appeared from a side door. "What's going on here?" he asked, his tone caught between confusion and inconvenience. Aldridge gestured toward Elijah. "This young man has made a rather extraordinary claim, that he solved an unsolved equation from my advanced calculus course. However, there are questions about authenticity and eligibility. He isn't an enrolled student." The dean's brow furrowed. "Is that true?" Elijah nodded, forcing his voice steady. "I'm part of the university's community outreach program. It allows high school students to attend lectures." The dean sighed. "Then technically, you're a guest." He presented work that seems far beyond his level. Aldridge interjected. "And quite similar to a restricted research thesis I reviewed." The dean turned to Elijah. "Do you have any documentation of your prior work?" Elijah's hand went instinctively to his backpack. "Yes, sir." He pulled out a weather-worn composition notebook. The kind with black and white marbled covers peeling at the corners. The binding was taped several times, edges curled from years of use. It wasn't polished. It wasn't clean, but it was his proof of the hours, days, and years he had spent alone at his desk, writing what the world had refused to see. "This is your proof?" Aldridge asked, half smiling, half sneering. Elijah opened it slowly, laying it flat on the dean's desk. The first pages were faint, filled with pencil scribbles from when he was 10, simple arithmetic experiments. Then algebra, then diagrams of sine curves drawn freehand. As the pages turned, the writing grew denser, more confident. Integrals, derivatives, convergence theorems, notes on matrix transformations. The evolution of a mind teaching itself, refusing to wait for permission. Each equation carried a story, nights lit by a single desk lamp, textbooks borrowed from the public library, pieces of scratch paper turned into practice sheets when notebooks ran out. Every mistake, every correction, every small triumph. "This notebook," Elijah said, "is everything I've learned. Since I was 10, Dr. Voss stepped closer. Her eyes softened as she read the pencil-faded lines. "You've been building your own foundation," she murmured. "All this time." Aldridge, however, barely glanced at it before leaning back in his chair. "Anyone can copy from the internet," he said. Elijah looked up, incredulous. "The first 30 pages were written before I even had internet at home." The professor gave a small shrug, the kind that carried the arrogance of unmovable belief. "Still, unverified work has no academic standing. Handwritten pages prove nothing." Voss's patience snapped. "You're not even trying to be objective." The dean held up a hand. "Dr. Voss, please. Let's proceed fairly." He flipped through the pages himself, eyes scanning the chaos of symbols, erasers, revisions. There was no way to fake this kind of obsessive curiosity. Yet when he spoke, his tone was diplomatic. "It's clear the young man has aptitude, but we need official verification to validate originality." Elijah's chest tightened. "So, none of this matters?" The dean sighed again. "I didn't say that. I said it needs review." Aldridge smiled faintly. "Which in plain terms means it's inadmissible as evidence of authorship." The words landed like stones. Elijah's hands trembled slightly as he closed the notebook. He wanted to argue, to yell, to demand they see what was right in front of them. But he remembered the rule he'd learned early in life. Anger from someone who looked like him was never read as passion. It was read as threat. Voss turned to the dean. "At least let me scan and log his work for comparison. If it matches nothing, we'll have proof of originality." "Very well," the dean said. "But until then, the matter remains under review." Aldridge's expression barely changed, but the corners of his mouth twitched, satisfaction hiding behind professionalism. "Agreed." Elijah sat there, staring at the polished wood desk, at the contrast between his worn notebook and their pristine paperwork. Every mark of erasure, every smudge of graphite on those pages felt like a record of a battle he'd fought alone. Yet here, it was reduced to inadmissible. He closed his eyes for a second, steadying himself. "Mr. Monroe," the dean said, tone now bureaucratic. "Until this review concludes, you'll refrain from attending further advanced classes. We'll contact you when the matter is resolved." The words rang in his ears like a verdict. Voss turned sharply. "You can't suspend him from learning." The dean adjusted his glasses. "It's not suspension, it's procedural," Aldrich added. "He's welcome to reapply when he's of college age." Voss looked like she might explode. "That's not the point, and you know it." But Elijah didn't move. He simply gathered his notebook, placed it back in his bag, and stood up. His silence spoke louder than protest ever could. As he walked toward the door, the professor's voice followed him, smooth and cool. "You have talent, Mr. Monroe. But genius without discipline is dangerous." Elijah paused, his hand on the doorknob. "No, Professor," he said without turning around. "It's only dangerous when it comes from someone you don't expect." The dean looked uneasy. Aldrich said nothing. Voss caught up to Elijah in the hallway. "You don't deserve this," she said, her voice cracking. "You did everything right." He nodded slowly. "Maybe doing everything right doesn't matter." She opened her mouth to speak, then stopped. There was nothing to say that could fix what had been done. That afternoon the campus hummed with rumor. The story of the fake prodigy spread fast. A brilliant lie, they said. Some claimed Elijah had printed someone else's equations and rewritten them by hand. Others said his work had been plagiarized from AI. It didn't matter that none of it was true. The doubt was the real infection. Elijah sat on a bench outside the library, staring at the notebook in his lap. His mother's text lit up his phone. "How did it go, baby?"
He couldn't answer. Not yet.
He opened the journal again, flipping to the last page he'd written before the confrontation. The pencil marks trembled slightly from the pressure of his hand. The night before, underneath the equations, he had scrawled a line he'd once read in an old math book. "Truth is not measured by the number of people who believe it." He ran his fingers over the faded line. The world had a way of taking truth and calling it arrogance when it came from certain mouths. As he sat there, a shadow fell over him. He looked up to see one of the students from Aldrich's class, a tall blonde sophomore named Colin. He was holding his phone awkwardly, guilt flickering in his eyes. "Elijah," he said quietly, "I need to show you something." Elijah frowned. "What is it?" Colin hesitated, glancing around before sitting beside him. He unlocked his phone, scrolling through the gallery. A video appeared. The classroom from earlier that morning. It showed the entire confrontation. Aldrich's accusation, the humiliation, the phrase that had silenced the room. He should have known his place. "You recorded this?" Elijah asked, stunned. Colin nodded. "Yeah, I didn't know what to do at first, but people need to see what really happened." Elijah stared at the screen, the image of himself standing alone against that wall of disbelief. The idea hit him all at once. The twist of irony. They'd wanted proof of his mind, but this was proof of their cruelty. Colin swallowed hard. "I can post it, if you want." Elijah looked back at the notebook in his lap, then at the video. For the first time in days, he felt something ignite in his chest. Not anger, but purpose. "Do it," he said quietly. "Show them the proof they can't erase." Colin nodded, his thumb hovering over the upload button. A classmate secretly recorded the confrontation. Within hours of Colin uploading the video, social media ignited like dry kindling. The classroom recording went viral. Shared, reshared, clipped, commented, memed. Elijah watched from his phone, seated in the quiet corner of his bedroom. The upload notification count ticked upward. Hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands. He felt his chest constrict as the replies rolled in. At first, hopeful messages came. "This is unbelievable, he deserves credit. Stand with Elijah. That professor looks awful." But those were quickly drowned out by torrents of scorn, suspicion, and viciousness disguised as critique. On Reddit's mathematics or STEM forums, threads sprung up. "Kid claims to solve open equation. Is he real? Show your proof or you're lying." Probably AI code pasted and dressed up. Others dug through the numbers in his favor, only to conclude he must have cheated. Comments like "no one that young could pull that off," or "that's too polished, too perfect" littered every page. Academic blogs written by junior scholars around the country posted articles titled, A claimed solution, or a clever forgery, or when geniuses appear out of nowhere, a cautionary tale. They picked apart his derivation, weighed margin styles, compared his notation with published work. Some accused him of plagiarizing obscure theses. Others claimed he must have had inside help. Many articles hedged every accusation with if true or yet unverified, as though the burden of proof lay entirely on him. Elijah's name circulated. His identity became a trending debate. Some posters questioned the legitimacy of his outreach program status. He's not even a student. What right does he have? Others went deeper, insinuating hidden privileges. Oh, he has wealthy mentors. He probably got early access to research papers. The insinuations twisted themselves into racial undercurrents. A few worse posts were open. They'll make up a black genius story for clicks. Better watch his sources. Something smells fishy. He felt each swipe of a thumb, each scolding retweet, each comment accusing him of theft as a blade slicing at his confidence. He read the worst ones at night, sticky inside his mind. He tried not to, but the flood drowned him anyway. He thought of the notebook, of the small symbols drawn late at night. Were they proof enough in a world built to refuse them? In the middle of that storm, Dr. Voss reached out to him via email. Do not engage unless necessary. Let the truth stand on its own. I will do what I can. She advised discretion. Investigations, cross-checks, legal counsel. She offered to help with institutional pressure. But she warned him, public attacks get louder than defenses. Still, Elijah felt compelled to respond at times. One long night, he crafted a short post on GitHub. Here is my notebook, open to inspection and challenge. He linked scanned pages of his journal, but even that was misrepresented. Critics claimed the images were photoshopped, that timestamps were manipulated. Some downloaded them, enhanced contrast, circled faint erasures, and argued they looked fake. He watched commentators line up to disassemble his handwriting. The pressure to defend every smudge and scrap. He didn't have the energy to refute every attack. Some nights he lay awake trying to remember why he believed in any of it. He thought of his mother, of the nights she kissed his forehead before sleep, and urged him to keep learning. He thought of the chalk dust, the countless nights alone at his desk, pages crumpled, pencils broken. He thought of the board in room 2116, and the million eyes that had shifted toward him. That was real. That was proof. Then, one evening, his notifications lit up with a tweet from a major academic account. A name he recognized with dread. Math Frontiers Review. Its bio read, Critical Analysis of Advances in Pure Math. The tweet carried his full derivation scanned and posted publicly, unwatermarked, uncredited. The caption read, New claimed solution to open functional integral problem. Let's see who owns this. Now the world could examine every line at full resolution. Every user could zoom, copy, repost. Every amateur critic could magnify every ambiguous mark. His math was no longer safe behind his pen. It was laid bare to be scrutinized by thousands beyond his control. Elijah stared at his phone. The tweet sat there glowing, full derivation attached, debate open. He felt something inside him flex, fear, yes, but also determination. They had demanded exposure. Now they would get full exposure. A major academic Twitter account published his full work. The tweet by Math Frontiers Review lit up Elijah's world. Exposure he never asked for but now could not deny. By morning it had been retweeted, dissected, commented upon by thousands. Overnight his math was out in the open, raw and vulnerable. The university had awakened to a spectacle. Elijah's phone began buzzing. Before dawn. He opened his eyes to unread messages, news outlets tagging him, reporters requesting interviews, strangers demanding proof, and worst of all, anonymous threats. He sat upright, heart hammering. The walls of his small bedroom felt too thin. He wondered how to wrap the world around him so he could breathe again. Meanwhile, at Hawthorne Hall, the administration convened an emergency meeting. The provost, the dean, Aldridge, Dr. Voss, and the head of public relations gathered behind closed doors in the president's suite. The stakes had escalated from one classroom to the university's reputation. The provost, solemn, silver-haired, spoke first. We can't have the story that a high school student exposed our calculus challenge as bogus before any verification. The optics are dangerous. His eyes flicked to Aldridge. We need control, narrative, discretion. Aldridge nodded gravely. Yes, We need to emphasize process, academic rigor, suggest that the outreach program was never intended for competition. We'll shift the frame. It's about policy, not race. He broke the rules by entering. The dean, uneasy, rubbed his temples. But we can't appear to penalize him for doing math. That looks absurd. The public will see it as punitive. Voss, quiet but fierce, responded. You're all discussing damage control as though we're hiding something. He has a right to his work. People deserve to see how brilliance is recognized or rejected. They turned to public relations. The PR director, a middle-aged white woman in a crisp suit, cleared her throat. We issue a statement that the challenge is only open to degree-enrolled students, that the work will be independently verified, that until then, Ms. Monroe's status is that of a visiting participant, not a competitor. Aldridge interjected. Yes, and emphasized that we are proud of the outreach program and welcome his curiosity, but we must disqualify him from prize eligibility. They considered implementing a disclaimer in future problems, changing policy about guest contestants. But the provost said, let's do it quietly. No official memo yet. Drafted internally. We need buffer time to see what verification yields. At home, Elijah's mother, Karen Monroe, had woken to a flood of voicemails. She sat at the kitchen table in soft morning light, her eyes red from sleepless nights. She had always supported his math experiments, the late nights, the idea of him doing something no one expected. But now, the university spoke of disqualifying him. She wrapped her arms around a mug of coffee, feeling it tremble in her hands. Her phone rang. It was a restricted number. She hesitated, then answered. Hello? A smooth male voice said. Mrs. Monroe, this is Harold Grayson, at the National Mathematics Association. She froze. The NMA was one of the top academic bodies in pure mathematics. Remote, prestigious, usually unreachable. I've been following your son's case. I believe he deserves support and resources. Karen's breath caught. You know about him? I've seen the work. I have colleagues ready to vouch for it. We'd like to sponsor the independent review. If you'll permit us. She looked around her modest kitchen, at stacks of his notebooks, at the echo of his footsteps upstairs. The possibility felt too large to grasp. Why you? She whispered. Because we saw him, he said simply. And in math, knowing means you act. A sudden surge of hope overtook her fear. She whispered, yes, please help him. Meanwhile, the university's message went out quietly. A student newspaper posted an internal memo. Due to the outreach status of Mr. Monroe, the $1,000 prize applies to degree-enrolled students only. His work will be reviewed. Social media accounts affiliated with the university reposted it, emphasizing the language of inclusivity and fairness. Dozens of students reshared it with hashtags like DUNG, due process, and math is for all, though many added snarky commentary. Do you only get rewards if you pay tuition? Elijah saw it. He read it in his inbox. The statement sat there, formal and icy. We value brilliance, eligibility, review process, outreach, rules, but never once we believe him. He closed the email, his chest heavy. The message was clear. You can see what's right, but we reserve the right to deny you credit for it. At school, rumors shifted. The narrative changed from kid solved impossible problem to kid broke a rule. Some students who had cheered now distanced themselves. Others called him cocky, reckless. A few held quietly to the video, but most let the official story replace their memory. Elijah walked the halls, invisible again, but now framed as someone who overstepped. He passed the scaffolding of bulletin boards, where calculus competition flyers hung, where club meetings posted announcements. He glanced at them. They had nothing for someone like him now. Dr. Voss tried to shield him. She spoke at faculty meetings, argued procedural fairness, and vocalized concerns about implicit bias. But Aldridge and the administration listened, sometimes as if debating policy, not injustice. Elijah felt the world press upon him, the reach of an institution that could declare who belonged and who didn't. His math was valid, but in the eyes of his once allies, his identity made him disqualified. Then that evening, his phone buzzed with another message. This one from his mother. They called me today. He stared, heart pounding. Called from where? Who? He opened messages. Mr. Monroe, this is Harold Grayson. I've spoken to your mother. We're preparing a statement of support. We'll call soon. Elijah sat back. The world was shifting beneath him. Power and alliances rising in unexpected places. But someone powerful reached out to his mother. Elijah sat in the dim corner of his living room, the laptop screen painting his face in cold blue light. He scrolled through replies to the Math Frontiers review tweet, his eyes stinging. His mother sat quietly across the room, knitting, listening. The air felt thick with waiting. Then a new email alert bounced in. From Dr. Caroline Voss. His breath caught. He opened it. The subject line. An offer beyond verification. Her words were measured but urgent. I have been following the discussions, watching the video, parsing your derivations in the scans. What you've done cannot be dismissed by institutional semantics alone. If you're willing, I'd like to meet with you, in private, to discuss support, collaboration, and how to elevate this beyond a classroom fight. You don't have to go through this alone. Elijah leaned back, digesting. It was one thing for a visiting lecturer to defend him. It was another for her to extend an invitation into partnership, into a level of trust. His chest felt tight, hope mixed with fear. He looked toward his mother. Her knitting slackened. Her eyes held a question. Should he accept? Meanwhile, at the university, the internal machinery churned faster than ever. Aldridge sat behind his desk, reading email chains from department chairs and PR teams. The outreach program's head fumed. The provost sent notes. Control narrative. Evaluate damage. Don't let this become a movement. There were whispers of hiring consultants, legal counsel, academic reviewers. But Aldridge knew that such measures might inflame the very thing they sought to suppress. The fact that a black high schooler had publicly exposed a failing of their prestige. Dr. Voss had left faculty meetings early today. She slipped into her car and drove to a library parking lot near Elijah's neighborhood, an unassuming location, so as not to draw attention. She texted him, I can come to you, if needed. Just say where. The reply came, meet at the public library at 5 p.m. She nodded to herself, steeling her resolve. At 5, Elijah walked into the library's back reading room. Evening light filtered through broad windows, rows of books dim in twilight. He spotted Dr. Voss at a long wooden table, papers in front of her, annotations, overlays, side-by-side proof comparisons. She looked up as he entered, her expression calm but sharp. Thank you for coming, she said simply. Her tone carried weight, not pity. This is not a meet and greet. I want you safe, supported, seen. He sat across from her, notebook open but unused. He watched her hands steady, purposeful, flipping maps of his derivation, making notes in margins, comparing his scanned pages to obscure papers she pulled up on her tablet. You know, she said, I've done work in functional equations in graduate school. I saw patterns in your steps, subtle generalizations, leaps of intuition that are rarely taught. But more than that, I saw constraints traced in your margin notes, the ones you wrote before you even knew there was a problem like this. She placed her finger on a faint pencil bracket in one of his scans, side annotations in a margin cell. This margin, that's your voice, your habit. That's not something you pick up from a PDF. That's yours. Elijah's throat tightened. I don't know what to say. She leaned in. I believe you. But more importantly, I want to help you make this more than a controversy. Let's bring in verified mathematicians. Publish your work. Protect it. Let's make your name stand on your brilliance, not on this fight. He swallowed. But they already published it. Math Frontiers posted it without credit. She nodded. Yes. That both complicates things and gives us leverage. We can demand attribution. We can file takedown requests. We can bring you into academic conversations where your work is vetted, amplified. They talked for nearly an hour. She walked him through options, academic journals, open peer review, legal protections, outreach for support from institutions. She warned him of dangers, harassment, misquotation, institutional pushback. She offered to loop in trusted colleagues at respected universities, mathematicians who could quietly vouch for him, help him defend his originality. As dusk deepened, she leaned back. Elijah, I want to bring in people who won't write him off as a child or a publicity stunt. We can publish an annotated version of your derivation, with commentary, margin notes, comparisons to related work, to show that your proof is fleshed out, not copied. Let them see not only that you solved it, but how you thought. He considered her words. This was more than rederiving in front of skeptical professors. This was about legitimacy on his own terms, reframing the narrative, from did he cheat, To this is a mathematician's contribution. He nodded slowly. I want that. I want to be heard. She smiled, not triumphant, but resolve. Good. Then we move forward together. I will reach out to a few discreet allies. But for now, you must be careful. Don't post, unless we coordinate. Don't respond to trolls, unless necessary. We'll build from strength, not attack from desperation. He exhaled, feeling fragile power in that partnership. They sat in silence a moment. Then she rose, gathering her notes. He stood too. The room felt heavier now, fuller. The game had shifted. As they walked out into the hallway, side by side, neither spoke for a few steps. Then Dr. Voss said quietly, Elijah, I'll be calling your mother tomorrow. She deserves to know the bigger plans. He nodded, and as they stepped into the night, a notification pinged on his phone. He checked a new tweet, reposted by Math Frontiers Review, tagging Dr. Voss. Intriguing alliance. Let's see where this goes. Open Math. Their names now bound, publicly in the same thread. The battlefield had shifted again, from classroom to networks, from accusations to alliances. She wanted to meet Elijah, in private. The nights that followed the meeting with Dr. Voss saw Elijah's mind rattle with possibilities. His proof, dissected and exposed, now trembled beneath trolling hands, but behind the scenes a more dangerous current flowed, one he was just beginning to sense. At Hawthorne Hall, archives of previous challenge problems were being quietly scrubbed. The problem Aldridge presented this semester, the one Elijah solved, vanished from the database of past open challenges. Faculty websites were edited to remove references to it. Graduate students working on related research reported being warned not to speak publicly about the problem. Emails were whispered deletions, memos retracted. Something was wrong. Dr. Voss, meanwhile, quietly accessed an internal repository. She discovered that the challenge had never been truly open. The equation, its constants, A, B, C, had been carefully designed year after year to be resistant to known methods. It was seeded into curricula under the guise of academic rigor. But she found draft documents indicating that only a small committee, Aldridge's inner circle, had copies of baseline structures of possible solutions. In effect, it was a trap problem, a challenge intended to test students not to be solved. If someone ever cracked it, it would upend the system. In one memo she read a line that chilled her. Ensure that no undergraduate or external scholar solves problem X in full generality. Its value lies in being unsolved. Another draft read, allow partial conjectures only, full solution should remain the province of selective researchers. The political function of the problem was explicit. Prestige, exclusivity, leverage. Voss took these revelations to a trusted colleague in another Ivy mathematics department. That scholar verified the draft documents, traced metadata back to the university servers. The evidence was credible. This equation, long praised as a beacon, had been weaponized. A prestige challenge masked as open inquiry. It existed not to invite solutions, but to maintain the gatekeeping of academic acclaim. Elijah received a private call from Dr. Voss that night. Her voice trembled, not from fear but urgency. You don't just have a proof, Elijah. You've exposed a system. They deliberately created a problem to guard against solutions. You are the anomaly they never expected. Elijah's heart pounded. So they set the trap, and I solved it? She sighed. Yes. And now they need to discredit you, or destroy the proof. They will use any tool, including administrative power, to control the narrative before you can go public. That revelation turned every prior action into more than personal scorn. It became institutional cover-up. Elijah realized that this fight was never about student mathematics or competition. It was an exercise in control. His presence as someone the system didn't anticipate was proof of a lie. Meanwhile, the university's legal counsel was quietly activated. Aldridge whispered into phone lines. He swore would not be recorded. The provost talked with trustees. The board of regents was alerted to possible defamation. Plans were made to call the challenge invalid, to claim a breach in protocol, or to retroactively revoke the outreach program's permission to compete. Unbeknownst to them, Elijah's phone buzzed with another message, this one from Harold Grayson, of the National Mathematics Association. We have read the internal draft documents. We would like to help preserve your rights. Expect a letter tomorrow. Elijah felt the gears shifting beyond campus. The fight would not be contained. The challenge was no longer just about redemption. It was about exposing the myth of meritocracy in academia itself. At dawn, the campus sent out a press release. It framed the problem as recently discovered mathematical inconsistencies and announced that all work on Problem X would be temporarily suspended pending review. It didn't mention Elijah. It didn't mention It spoke of integrity, process, fairness. But the wording "recent inconsistencies" implied the possibility of error in the proof, not of institutional misconduct. News outlets picked it up. Headlines ranged: University investigates unsolved math problem, amid controversy, to outreach student claims full solution, University suspends the challenge. Don't mention the word black, but race hovered in the subtext. Some articles called it a youthful overreach, others an audacious claim. Very few acknowledged the real intrigue, that the problem itself had been structured to remain unsolved indefinitely. Elijah watched the headlines stacking against him. He felt the oppressive weight of narrative friction, the demand to retract, to apologize, to accept an institutional decision. Instead, his resolve hardened. If the system hid behind process, he would force transparency. Dr. Voss arrived at his door that evening, carrying a sealed envelope. "This has come from the NMA," she said, handing it. Inside was a draft of a formal letter, supporting the claim of originality, demanding due recognition, threatening legal suit if rights are suppressed, and a copy of the internal draft documents she'd discovered, redacted where necessary. It also named several mathematics departments willing to host peer review panels. Elijah stared at the package, its weight concrete in his hands. She said, "They don't expect you to counterattack. They expect silence. You can't give that to them." He nodded slowly, his voice steady. "Then we fight." That night, the university's legal counsel drafted a quiet but sharp motion. It would be filed in the jurisdiction of their state court, injunction to prevent unauthorized dissemination of proprietary challenge materials, and to suspend public discussion until internal review complete. In effect, they would seek to gag Elijah, silence discussion, and reclaim control, all without referencing race, without acknowledging the exposure of their internal agenda. Elijah heard the news through a leak in faculty channels. Someone had discovered the draft, and rumors swirled among graduate students. The word lawsuit circulated in hushed tones in hallways. The equation that had been considered unreachable was now a political battleground. In his bedroom, Elijah sat before his notebook, his scanned derivation open on his laptop, the internal drafts from Voss beside him. The lines of math no longer felt academic, they felt like signals in a code of power. Every symbol was contested. Every proof was trajectory and resistance. When dawn broke, he stepped outside. The campus looked the same: red brick, green lawns, students walking with backpacks. But beneath the surface, something had cracked. The apparition of institution was cracking too. His name, his proof, his identity were weaponized. The fight had grown. That afternoon, a quiet delivery arrived at his home. A certified letter addressed to Elijah Monroe. Notice of intended litigation. Elijah's hand trembled as he broke the seal. Inside, a legal firm name he didn't know demanded immediate surrender of all copies of his work. A statement of withdrawal, and a threat: failure to comply may result in injunctive relief and reputational damages. The letter read carefully, implying breach of contract, unauthorized use of unpublished challenge materials, and intellectual theft. His eyes stung. The system that claimed ownership over the future now demanded he suppress his own history. He realized the twist was deeper than he had known. They were not only trying to silence him, they were trying to make him an offender in their own narrative. He looked over the address again. It was delivered from the university's legal department. It bore an official seal. He felt suddenly small before its formality. But he shut the door behind him and exhaled. Dr. Voss stood behind him, reading over his shoulder. "They filed it," she said quietly. "A lawsuit is already threatened." Elijah's heart pounded. He looked at her. "We knew it would come." She nodded, fierce and resolved. "We'll respond. Protect your rights. Publish everything. Go public with proof. Expose the internal drafts. Let the world see how this was designed, not discovered." He held his notebook close, his scanned files open. The battle had escalated beyond classroom or institution. It had become legal, public, structural. The power had shifted from chalk to documentation, from lecture to lawsuit. And in that moment, as shadow and morning mingled in his room, he understood this was never about $1,000 reward. It was about who gets to define genius, who gets to question elite walls, and who is allowed to belong. A lawsuit was quietly filed against the university. After the town hall, Elijah's inbox swelled with media requests. The narrative had shifted, no longer merely a classroom controversy. His story was being framed as a test of justice, brilliance, and race in academia. One major news network, Channel 8 News, reached out with an offer: a televised interview, a 30-minute special segment. The catch: it had to be recorded by noon the next day. Dr. Voss and Elijah reviewed their notes late that evening, planning which portions of his journey to highlight. His mother listened from the doorway, fear and pride mingling in her eyes. "They'll try to twist you," she warned softly. "Stay firm in who you are." When morning came, the news crew arrived with lights, camera setups, and a producer named Marcia Dalton. She greeted Elijah politely, but her eyes, behind the makeup and microphone, flickered with concern. The studio was glossy, polished, and efficient, everything his story was not supposed to be. He was led to a small green room, where the audio technician tested mics, the lighting director adjusted angles, and the producer hovered over playback screens. Marcia leaned in. "We love your story, but just so you know, some executives are worried it won't fit the primetime brand." Elijah frowned. "What does that mean?" She sighed. "They're afraid of backlash. That viewers won't respond well to a 16-year-old black kid dissecting academic procedure. They want to soften it, leave out the parts about race, threats, the lawsuit. Focus just on the math and your journey." He swallowed. "That changes the story. That erases the fight." Marcia looked apologetic. "I know. I'll advocate. But control isn't fully in my hands." When they wheeled him onto the set, lights bright and cameras rolling, Elijah sat opposite the anchor, an older white journalist named Tom Harlow. The teleprompters glowed. The interview began smoothly. His background, his education, the outreach program. The questions then probed the challenge, the derivation and the verification process. Elijah answered clearly, confidently, citing margin notes, institutional pressure, internal draft memos uncovered by Voss. Then Harlow leaned forward. "Let's address the public's question. Do you really believe you solved an impossible problem? Is it possible someone leaked the solution to you?" He paused, gaze sharp. Elijah braced. He replied softly, firmly, "I did it myself. I wrote those margins, long before I ever saw this problem. That journal isn't about proving to you. It's a record of my own growth." He stared forward, steady. Backstage, Marcia's jaw clenched. She panned to producers, whispering. Some nodded. Others shook their heads. The executives behind glass view screens watched, frowning. As Harlow prepared his next question, an off-camera voice interrupted. "The studio director. Cut." The cameras halted. Monitors went blank. Elijah sat frozen. Thousands of viewers would see a pause instead of his answer. The crew gasped softly. Marcia's eyes widened. The producer hurried in. "They want a new take. We have to re-record, wait for executive sign-off." Elijah's voice trembled. "You're pulling the plug." A producer shook her head. "Just for the next section. They'll air your answers about math. Leave out the rest. It's safer." Marcia looked at Elijah with regret. "I'm so sorry. They think this is too controversial." He swallowed hard. He thought back to his mother, to the classroom gazes, to the notebook. He understood the weight of every omission. But just then, alarms sounded in the control room. The monitors flickered. A barrage of alerts, social media feed, exploded with the story. Channel 8 nearly silenced high school mathematician. Thousands tweeted, "Let him speak," demanding the full interview. Comments flooded in. "Cancel that cut, he deserves to be heard. Don't censor the truth." Producers stared at screens. The executive suite panicked. The compromise offer, cutting out race, threats, lawsuit, was met with revolt from the public. The backlash was immediate and fierce. Marcia turned to Elijah. "You forced their hand. They want to air this, the full segment." Cameras powered back up. Producers scrambled. Harlow re-entered. The director cleared his throat. "We'll go live in 10 seconds. Elijah's heart thundered. The red on-air light glowed. He swallowed. The anchor nodded. "Tonight we bring you the uncut conversation with Elijah Monroe." Across the city, screens flickered on, tuned in. In living rooms, students paused their devices. Some pressed record. In campuses, math clubs gathered. The moment had erupted beyond expectation. Back in the studio as the live countdown finished, a staff producer whispered to Marcia, "We almost didn't air him." She shook her head, eyes moist. From his seat facing the camera, Elijah straightened. He looked directly into the lens. The studio lights felt like the midday sun. He felt exposed, vulnerable, but resolute. Harlow cleared his throat, voice crisp. "Elijah, tonight you will speak fully, your voice unabridged." And behind him, through the glass walls of the studio, Elijah glimpsed someone at the executive viewing gallery. Professor Aldridge, arms crossed, watch. He swallowed, inhaled. The next words would reach beyond studio walls, into the world. Elijah was invited to speak live, and the professor was watching. Once the lawsuit notice circulated, and public attention intensified, Elijah's world constricted. The legal pressure was one front. The emotional assault was another. Overnight his inbox glowed with messages. Some supportive, many toxic, and a few carefully sinister, designed to push him off balance. He first noticed the emails. One arrived from an address masked behind layers of anonymity. Subject line, "We can help you disappear." The message body read, "You've stirred up trouble. Back down now. Quietly. We'll compensate you for your compliance. No one needs to get embarrassed." Beneath that, a bank account routing number, and a suggestion, "Drop the case, release a retraction. Walk away." It felt like a cold hand on his spine. Later his phone rang late at night. The caller ID blank. He answered cautiously. A man's voice, deep, modulated. "Mr. Monroe, I represent parties with vested interest in the status quo. It would be wise to consider your options. Challenges bring exposure and consequences." The line went dead before Elijah could respond. He stared at the screen, trembling. He had not expected direct threats so soon. Alongside threats came smears. Anonymous websites appeared within hours, bearing headlines like "Teen claims grandiose math feat," "Sources say rejected papers not promising," or "Was Elijah trained by hidden network?" These sites dredged through his high school history, grades, disciplinary records, social clubs, anything to cast doubt on his character. They twisted innocuous things into evidence of cheating. Photos from family albums were altered. His notebooks shone with suspicious watermarks, images with shadows erased or enhanced. Doctored screenshots circulated, purporting to be old forum posts in which Elijah admitted he plagiarized. None of them true, but many were plausible under the stress of public belief. Even people he thought were allies began to falter in silence. Some mathematicians who had privately pledged support withdrew their names from letters of backing. Emails to university departments urging fair treatment went unanswered. Voss's own position became precarious. Whispers circulated that she was politically compromised, that backing Elijah might endanger her career. She approached him quietly one evening. "They're applying pressure on my department," she said, voice low. "I might have to step back, temporarily, but I'm not done." Her eyes were weary, fierce. Then came the most dangerous offer. Elijah's mother got a call at home. The voice claimed to be from a private donor, a philanthropist who admired Elijah's brilliance. They offered to pay his tuition in full, under the condition that all legal action be dropped, that Elijah sign a non-disclosure agreement, never publicly contest the university, and hand over all copies of his derivation. In return, a scholarship, secrecy, prestige regained in private. The language was polite, almost flattering, but the demand was clear. It was bribe veiled in care. Karen Monroe confided in her son. Elijah listened to the message, smoothly recorded, framing opportunity rather than coercion. He felt his stomach knot, his jaw clenched. Was this a lifeline or a trap? His mind raced through the implication. Accepting would silence him, perhaps protect his family, but rejecting it risked escalation. The media, meanwhile, sensed the turbulence. Rumors of a behind-the-scenes settlement began circulating. Sources say university offering hush money. Scholarship deal may silence controversy. The narrative was shifting fast. Some news outlets framed the university's offer as benevolence, support for young prodigy, drop case, get future secured, as though they were doing him a favor. Others smelled coercion and injustice. Elijah considered silence. He weighed the cost, legal battle, emotional exhaustion, public harassing messages, possible career sabotage. Some nights he slept little, haunted by dread and uncertainty. He thought of his mother, of Dr. Voss, of the notebook in his drawer, of the proof that had always been his own. The idea of surrender filled him with a deep ache, not defeat, but betrayal of himself. And then the twist. In the middle of the night, his phone pinged with a new notification. It was not an accusation or threat. It was a message from Harold Grayson, the National Mathematics Association contact. The subject, plan activate. The body, tomorrow at high noon. The full derivation will be live-streamed from a secure academic server with expert commentary. All smear sites, takedown orders, and bribery offers become null. We protect the record. Be ready. Elijah's pulse thundered. This was more than support. It was counterattack. A strategy. He realized. They weren't offering him a retreat. They were offering him a stage. The decision he would make now wouldn't only define his fight, but potentially rewrite the narrative of this entire challenge. He typed a response. I'm ready. Let them see. The night stretched heavy. Outside, wind stirred branches. Inside, his room felt like ground zero. He understood what was coming. Exposure, backlash, escalation. But he also understood that silence was surrender. In the morning, cameras would see, voices would hear, consequences would multiply, and there would be no turning back. But Elijah made a decision that would go viral. The red live sign glowed above the town hall stage, casting a silent, blinking heartbeat over the packed auditorium. Every seat was taken, and a line of students spilled into the hallway, necks craned to catch a glimpse through the doors. Outside, crowds formed around large screens, where the event was being streamed in real time. News cameras were positioned like satellites along the back wall. Phones were raised like lighters in a concert hall, filming, documenting. But this wasn't a performance. It was a reckoning. At the podium stood Elijah Monroe. No teleprompter, no script, just a teenage boy in a blue button-up shirt, his journal clutched tightly in one hand. The auditorium, once loud with anticipation, now held a quiet, so dense it felt sacred. Elijah's voice was calm but ironclad. Most of you know my name now because of an equation, he began, scanning the room. But for most of my life, people didn't see me at all. Not as a student, not as a thinker, not as someone who could contribute. When I walked into classrooms, they saw someone out of place. When I raised my hand, they assumed I was guessing. And when I solved the problem that wasn't supposed to be solved, they said it had to be a mistake. A soft murmur rolled through the crowd. Uncomfortable. Recognizing. I didn't set out to break a system, he continued. I just followed where the math led me. But apparently some answers are only allowed if they come from the right person, in the right skin, with the right pedigree. Otherwise, the equation doesn't matter. On the overhead screen, behind him, images began to flicker. Stills from his journal, old scanned pages, dated annotations he made years before the university problem had even been published. His margin notes were messy, raw, intimate, the kind of scribbles only someone who had lived inside the math could produce. The screen split to show comparisons, his original derivation against the university's archived version. There was no plagiarism. No borrowed structure, just the unmistakable fingerprint of independent thought. From the front row, Dr. Voss watched, eyes glistening, her jaw set. She'd spent her entire career in academia, and tonight she knew she was witnessing something rare, not just truth, but transformation. And let's be honest, Elijah said, stepping slightly to the side, letting his journal rest on the podium. This was never just about an equation. It was about control, about narrative, about who gets to be the genius and who's labeled the fraud. Because when I did the same thing that would have earned applause from someone else, I got threats. When I proved it line by line, they called security. When I shared my journal, they called it fiction. Gasps from the crowd, audible now. Several faculty in the audience shifted in their seats, visibly uncomfortable. I was 16, Elijah said, and instead of encouragement, I got interrogation. I was told I didn't have the right look for this kind of success. Imagine being told that brilliance wears a face that isn't yours. He paused, letting the words land. Let me be clear. I don't want sympathy. I want acknowledgement. Not for me alone, but for every kid who's been overlooked, dismissed, told to wait their turn or lower their voice. For every student who was brilliant in silence. The screen shifted again. Clips from his viral interview, snippets of blog posts, hateful comments juxtaposed with letters of support from Black students across the country, who'd written to him in the weeks since. Their messages scrolled up the screen. Line, your courage gave me permission to believe I could be more. They told me to drop AP Calc, But then I saw your video. I didn't know I was allowed to try until I saw you try. The crowd stirred again, now visibly emotional. One teacher wiped away tears. Another clasped their hands over their heart. A few stood, then more. A slow building standing ovation erupting before Elijah even finished speaking. But he raised one hand. "Wait," he said. "Before you clap, you need to know this part." The room stilled. The equation I solved wasn't just a problem. It was a gate, built by people who didn't want it opened. The memo Dr. Voss found, it proved they never expected it to be solved. Not by a student. Certainly not by someone like me. And when I did, they didn't celebrate. They tried to cover it up. They said I cheated, that I had help, that my math was too perfect to be mine, because it had to be someone else's. He picked up his journal, flipping to a page. "But it's mine. Every line, every mistake, every correction. This journal is my history, and I won't erase it to make anyone else comfortable." Then his voice softer. "If you ever doubted someone because of how they looked, I ask you now to reconsider who you choose to see." He stepped back from the podium. Applause thundered. Loud, long, rising like a wave. Faculty, students, journalists, security guards. Even some who doubted him were now standing, unsure how to process what they'd just heard. But then, from the back of the auditorium, a girl stood. Her hands trembled, her face streaked with tears. Her voice cracked as she spoke, unamplified but piercing. "I need to say something." The crowd quieted. She stepped forward, slowly, eyes locked on Elijah. "I was in that classroom the day you solved it. I didn't say anything, but I heard them. The whispers, the laughs. I even laughed too. I'm sorry, I didn't believe you. Not because your math was wrong, but because I didn't think someone like you could be right." Gasps rippled. Elijah stood frozen. The girl continued, sobbing now. "I copied your notes once, not because I thought you were smart, but because I needed a shortcut. I saw your work, I knew it was real, and I still stayed quiet when they said you faked it. I didn't speak up." The crowd turned. Tension thickened. "But I'm speaking now," she said, voice rising. "Because the problem wasn't the math. It was me, and people like me who let this happen." The auditorium fell into stunned silence. Then in a wave, students began to stand, one by one, some nodding, some crying. One whispered, "I thought it too." The moment stretched, awkward, raw, heartbreaking. And then something unexpected happened. A senior faculty member, long silent through the ordeal, stood and said aloud, "I dismissed your proof, Elijah. Not because of the math, but because I couldn't admit a student had seen what I hadn't. I was wrong." Then another voice from the side. "We all were." The truth, not just mathematical, but moral, had begun to crack the walls. Elijah's fingers clenched the podium. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply nodded, a small, solemn gesture that said, "Thank you for finally seeing me." But in the hallway, just beyond the reach of the cameras, someone else was watching. Someone who hadn't clapped, who hadn't stood, who had listened quietly, arms folded across his chest. Professor Aldrich. And he wasn't done yet. A tearful student in the crowd stood up with a confession. In the days after the town hall, news outlets called former teachers, principals, and mentors from Elijah's past. The stories began to surface, not about his solution, but about the boy behind it, and how many had misjudged him. Miss Hawthorne, his 6th grade teacher, gave one of the earliest interviews. On camera, she sat in her modest classroom, surrounded by colored charts and posters. Her hands clasped her mug. She paused before speaking. Elijah was quiet. "Yes," she admitted, always sitting near the window, drawing graphs in his notebook. "I remember thinking he had curiosity, but I never imagined this level of originality. He wasn't loud, but he was always trying. I regret that I didn't push him more." Next came Mr. Lang, his high school algebra teacher, invited into a local news segment. He admitted somewhat sheepishly, "I saw Elijah's homework. It was good, above average, but when he didn't volunteer or compete, I think I assumed he lacked confidence. That's on me. I should have asked more questions. I should have believed in what I didn't see." These admissions circulated on social media and local news, threads forming. Everyone admits they underestimated him. The narrative shifted. The echoes of past judgments revealed, not innocence, but complicity. Elijah watched clips of these interviews in his room, layered over images from the town hall, the viral tweet, and his own journal scans. His chest felt heavy but charged. The story was changing again. It was peeling back layers, not just about his fight against the university, but about a lifetime of assumptions. Then the local public middle school principal, Miss Roman, was interviewed. She stood before a whiteboard, equations scribbles overhead. She cleared her throat. Elijah was in my 8th grade honors math class. His class projects were creative, exploratory. I remember one project he did on eigenvectors that won a small award at a regional fair. But at the time, I thought his potential would be fully realized in college. Not that he would shock us all now. I regret that we never recognized how much beyond the curriculum he was. One after another, the people who had taught him seemed humbled. The interviews ran back to back on morning shows. Pieces of evolutionary faith flickering across faces. In the montage, they spoke of lost opportunities. The time they assigned a paper to Elijah and thought he'd write a narrative, so they didn't expect calculus insight. The time they recommended help classes, not enrichment. Their regret was real, but also belated. Yet the shift wasn't just public. Within Hawthorne Hall's faculty lounges, doors cracked open. Some professors who had once stood by Aldrich began to murmur quietly. Maybe he did do it, or I always wondered why the class froze when he stood up. Their silence now fractured. Elijah felt it inside him. Vindication tempered by sorrow. He thought of every moment he had silenced himself. To avoid attention, every time he dimmed his growth so as not to stand out. The recognition was late, and it hurt. It was justice, but it was also evidence of years of erasure. Then came a turning moment. A popular local education podcast invited Elijah's former middle school teacher, Mr. Randall, known now for coaching math contests, to speak. Randall's interview aired live across several states. The host asked, "Did you ever see this coming?" Mr. Randall sighed. Before he answered, the lines of an image overlay flickered. Someone had quietly obtained Elijah's middle school transcripts and projected them beside the teacher's face. The host paused. Randall cleared his throat. "When I saw that transcript," he said, "I was shocked." He continued, voice tight. "I thought it was a misprint. Grades of A+ in advanced math in 7th grade. Test scores off the charts. Independent research notes in his assignments. But the school file had no annotations, no teacher flags, no awards. It was like someone buried his brilliance. We had a kid excelling beyond our recognition, and we never really looked." That transcript revealed that he belonged far beyond where anyone placed him. Across screens, commentaries erupted. The twist hit. Elijah had not just been underestimated. Some of his best work was actively suppressed in his school records. Others speculated whether administrative oversight or biases had stripped his transcript of honors, awards, notes, recommendations. It suggested a deeper erasure, not simply doubt, but institutional oversight. Elijah's mother received a call from the school district the next morning, an official inquiry into missing records. She looked at her son's face when she hung up. His eyes held both pain and resolve. He walked to his desk and opened his journal. He flipped to the earliest pages, side by side with copies of the transcripts. They didn't match in weight or in memory. His growth had existed in private, but the record did not reflect it. He typed a message to Dr. Voss. "They're investigating transcripts. I'm sending you the scans." She replied, "Good. This is deeper than we knew." The fight had grown again, from campus to school district, from a single equation to the architecture of how brilliance is recorded and recognized. And now, at the edge of discovery, Elijah was poised, not just to prove a solution, to force his middle school transcript, revealed something shocking. Elijah Monroe stepped from the taxi onto the path of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology grounds, just after dawn. The air carried a crisp promise, the soft hum of wind through trees, the distant murmur of morning foot traffic, and the faint scent of dew on concrete. He stood for a moment, absorbing the transition from suspicion and accusation to this place that called him scholar. It felt surreal. His driver unloaded his bags and gave him a nod. Elijah thanked him and watched the car roll away. In the stillness, he felt the weight of expectation. Around every corner was a peer who had always assumed someone else was meant to solve, meant to shine. Now that someone was him, he carried his backpack with one hand, the journal's digital scans stored in his laptop inside. He walked across the quad, passing students chatting about research, scribbling on tablets, grabbing coffee. Every glance felt a question. Who is he? But no one stared openly. Here he felt a possibility of being seen. Dr. Caroline Voss had arranged for a faculty escort. As he entered the main mathematics building, she greeted him with a poised, calm smile. "Welcome, Elijah. You made it," she said softly, releasing him from her grip. "This is your home now, or will be, as you build it." Her confidence bolstered him. Her presence affirmed that this wasn't just mercy or tokenism. She led him through corridors lined with plaques commemorating great mathematicians. Some names he knew, others he would learn. Doors labeled analysis, topology, functional equations, pure algebra. Students passed him, some nodding kindly, others' eyes flickering in surprise. Perhaps they saw the name card, visiting scholar. They entered an office suite, lined with blackboards scrawled with unfinished proofs. A few graduate students sat typing, their faces intent. Voss introduced him to Dr. Sloan Henderson, the department's liaison. "Elijah, this is Sloan. We hope you'll integrate here. Your presence changes the questions we ask." Henderson extended a hand. The gesture felt heavy with meaning. "I hope I can live up to everything this place believes in," Elijah replied. His voice carried a tremor, not fear exactly, but awareness. She nodded. "You already have." They toured the labs, computational clusters, collaborative rooms with whiteboards on every wall, shelves heavy with journals and bound theses. Elijah's breath caught when they passed a board where a current PhD student had sketched a solution outline, remarkably similar to his own style. Margin notes, bracketed side comments, arrowed transformations. He looked away quickly. Henderson noticed his hesitation. "You'll find more echoes of your ideas here than you expect. That's the nature of math. Convergence. But your voice will still be distinct." They arrived at the mathematics common room, a modern space with couches, tables strewn with papers, students in mid-discussion. A graduate student at a window seat looked up and blinked. Elijah paused. She rose and smiled. "Elijah Monroe?" she asked quietly. He nodded, a little warily. Her name tag read Priya Kumar, number theory PhD candidate. She walked over, lifting a stack of notebooks. "I read your interview last night. I'm a math nerd, so forgive me for fangirling." Her tone was casual, but her eyes were earnest. He relaxed. "No need to apologize. I've read some of your published work. It's incredible." Her smile widened as she extended her hand. "Welcome. If you ever want to run ideas, I'd love that." He shook her hand firmly. The gesture felt more human than he expected. Not formal, but connective. In that brief moment, he felt less like an outsider, more like someone opening a door. Anderson cleared her throat. "I'll leave you two to talk." She stepped back and smiled at both of them. "I'll see you at orientation in an hour." As Henderson walked away, Priya gestured to a whiteboard corner. "That margin notation, I remember seeing something like that in a preliminary draft of a paper I reviewed a semester ago. Funny overlap." She reached in her bag and pulled out a printed page. "Here, this was draft notes I annotated. Your margin style, bracket comments, even variable substitution labels. They feel akin, not identical, but similar enough to catch me off guard." Elijah's heart thudded. An unexpected twist. Someone had encountered similar reasoning, independently. Was this a coincidence, or shared intellectual lineage? His mind raced. He flipped through Priya's page, comparing notes. Differences remained, but the echo startled him. The discipline was bigger than one room. Priya looked at him with quiet curiosity. "I didn't expect to recognize something from you here. That means you'll feel at home, but also that you already belong." His throat tightened. "Thank you." They continued talking, walking together toward the orientation hall. Their conversation wound through math, personal background, the burden of expectation Elijah carried. He realized Priya's presence would become an anchor, not simply a companion. She knew the world of elite math, and she was reaching across to him. At the entrance to the orientation hall, students gathered, organizers checked badges. Elijah spotted banners. "Welcome new scholars, opening reception, first lecture tomorrow." His stomach fluttered. He inhaled, adjusting the strap of his backpack, steadying his resolve. As he stepped through the doors, he glanced up and froze. Standing at the front of the hall, reviewing a guest list, was a familiar face. Not a professor, not an administrator. It was someone he recognized from that first day at Hawthorne Hall. someone who had stood among the faculty present when he was accused, someone whose eyes locked on him now with a cold, inscrutable expression. Aldrich. He was here, in this place Elijah now called home. He wasn't far, just on the threshold. He looked at Elijah, then down to the papers in his hand, as though weighing what to do next. Elijah's breath caught. The walls of possibility had shifted again. The man who once tried to silence him now stood in the same space, in the same building. Their worlds intersected here, whether Elijah liked it or not. The orientation crowd filed in. The air hummed with anticipation. Elijah's heart thundered in his chest. The day that promised to mark a new beginning had turned into a battleground, moment by moment. A familiar face greeted him at the door. Elijah Monroe stood in the MIT auditorium, the lights dimming, a hush rippling through the packed hall. The stage was set for a joint presentation. He and Dr. Voss, flanked by faculty allies from multiple universities, were about to unveil the full chronicle of his proof, the internal memos, and the institutional cover-ups. This was not just a defense, it was a counterpunch. Every seat was occupied. Students, professors, press, legal observers, even administrators from Hawthorne Hall, whose faces flicked in the audience. He felt the weight of the moment, the culmination of years of study, nights of doubt, public humiliation, the smear campaigns, the threat letters, the lawsuit filed by the university. He felt it all behind him, but also propelling him forward. He inhaled, centered himself, and walked to the podium. The murmurs died. The screen lit up behind him, projecting his journal margins, scanned internal memos, faculty emails quietly unearthed. He began. What you will see today is not just a mathematical derivation. It is a story of power, silence, and the fragility of narrative control. His voice carried steady, bold but measured. He guided the audience step by step, how the differential integral equation was presented, how each attempt failed in past years, how the constants had been hidden levers, how the internal committee constructed the problem intentionally to resist solution, unless by their favored few. On the next slide, he revealed the memo Dr. Voss had discovered. Ensure that no non-graduate, non-department insider solves problem X. Only proposed solutions may be presented. Full derivation must remain internal. Gasps swept through the crowd. Men and women glanced sideways at one another, faculty shifting in seats. Elijah paused, letting the weight of that betrayal resonate. He pressed further. The institution framed this as open, public, honorable. But the proof was hidden, guarded by prestige. The moment I solved it, not because I cheated, not because I had inside help, but because I followed logic, they turned on me. They sought to erase me. The images behind him showed shifting. The original university statement disqualifying him, juxtaposed with interview clips from later, when even old teachers confessed they'd underestimated him. Then a surprise twist. The live stream feed, which had been projected publicly, flickered to an alternate overlay not planned in the presentation. On that overlay appeared additional documents, leaked emails between Aldrich and PR strategists, referencing damage control, narrative framing, disavow Monroe if necessary. The audience gasped again. Some faculty gasped, staring at faces around them. The university council leaned forward as though seeing those messages for the first time in public. The hall shivered with exposure. Elijah continued. They tried to reduce me to doubt, to rumor, to disqualification. But logic cannot be erased by prejudice. He walked across the stage, pointing to his journal scans, matching margin notes, the internal memos, side by side, proving alignment, evolution, independent derivation. When he finished the last slide, the screen faded to black. Silence held the room for a beat. Then applause burst, soft at first, then relentless, swelling, filling every corner. Some stood, others wiped tears. Many held up phones, recording, live posting. The justice he had demanded, acknowledgement, not apology, was unfolding in real time. After the presentation, Dr. Voss took the mic. She spoke of peer review, publishing the annotated derivation in leading journals, legal recourse, and institutional reform. Faculty from other universities stood up, offering reviews, replications, validations. Students cheered. A crowd of math societies pledged support. Journalists pushed for interviews. The narrative had turned, not from victim to crusader, but from silenced student to credible scholar. Later backstage, Elijah's mother, Karen, embraced him. He felt her tears like a healing rain. They held each other, the long years of worry, fear and faith compressing into that hug. But the denouement was not simple redemption. The fight had exposed a fracture far wider than one algorithm. When the media aired the presentation, commentary exploded not just about Elijah, but systems of exclusion. Who gets to solve? Who gets credit? Which voices get believed? University boards were petitioned for transparency. Mathematics departments publicly apologized. MIT offered Elijah a permanent fellowship and research funding. Aldrich's challenge program was suspended pending external audit. Yet as the story swept across academic circles, Elijah felt the familiar tug. What about the others? The students erased, whose brilliance never got scrutiny. The black-brown marginalized kids whose notes never got scanned, whose margin notes never got believed. He understood then that his journey was a testament, but also a question. In a closing address broadcast across campus screens, Elijah stood in front of the same auditorium. His voice firm. I solved an equation. But more than that, I forced a hidden agenda into the light. Justice is not just proving you were right. It's making institutions change, so others will never be silenced, the way I was. The screens behind him shifted to blank. The lights came up. The audience rose in a standing ovation that felt universal, not just personal. He left the stage, walking through corridors, waving to students and professors. Cameras followed him. Reporters asked questions. He paused to sign books, digital copies of his derivation, journal scans. Hands reached for him. The world now wanted him, not to erase him, but to hear him. But at the exit door, he stopped. He looked back at the auditorium's hush, at the empty blackboard, at the rows of seats now fading under lights. He realized the question that lifetime would still challenge. Who else had been dismissed? Which stories were waiting in classrooms? Silent journals, unseen margin notes. He stepped outside into dusk, where campus lawns lay quiet under street lamps. A nearby screen replayed his presentation. The crowd chanting, "Let everyone see." He walked past it slowly, notebook in hand, his mind already turning to the next fight, not just his redemption, but collective recognition. And as night deepened, he whispered to himself, "You can't solve everything alone." And yet, one final question remained. Who else had been overlooked? Some truths don't need a headline. They need witnesses. If this story shook something in you, don't let it disappear in silence. Type yes if you believe his life mattered, and subscribe if this broke your heart.